Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to Perry World House. My name is Michael Weisberg. I'm the Deputy Director, and it's really a great pleasure to welcome all of you here today. It's great to see such a large audience in person, and I know we have another large audience on the screen. So for those of you that don't know Perry World House, this is Penn's hub for global engagement. We try to bridge the gap between academia and the global policy world, fostering international policy engagement within and beyond the Penn community. And our work is structured around four pillars: democracy, human rights, global justice, and security. But of course, today, we will be primarily focused on climate change because it is, in fact, Penn Climate Week. So today, this is the opening event of a conference that will be happening, which will begin today with a keynote and end tomorrow afternoon with another keynote. But the conference as a whole is about climate cooperation and the future of climate leadership and multilateralism, because this is the 10th year anniversary of the Paris Agreement, and we're also just a few weeks away from COP30 in Brazil. Now, of course, the negotiation text, which many of us in this room have spent our lives thinking about, are their words on pages. They're abstract, they're really hard sometimes to communicate. And one of the things that we thought would be important is to actually think of other modalities by which we can communicate. And so it's a really great pleasure for us to have Jason Edwards, a renowned National Geographic photographer, join us both for this conference and also this year as a distinguished visiting fellow for Perry World House. So over the past decades, Jason has documented both the breathtaking beauty of the natural world and the urgent threats that it faces. His photography illustrates the unique power of still imagery to shape narratives, to inspire communities, and to influence policy. And so in this special event, Jason will explain how visual storytelling from the front lines of the climate crisis can spark action. And he'll also discuss the future of his craft, given the rise in reach of new technologies such as artificial intelligence. But for you will all get to know Jason in this hour, and of course you'll find that behind the lens are amazing adventures, challenges, insights, beauty, and it will offer us a rare glimpse into what it takes to capture shots like the one that's on the screen now. It's also a great pleasure to have a wonderful moderator, Professor Gwendolyn Du Bois Shaw, who is the inaugural faculty director of Penn's Arthur Ross Gallery. Dr. Shaw's research focuses on portraiture and issues of representation, primarily in the American context. She's previously served on the faculty of Harvard University and is the director of research, publications, and scholarly programs at the Smithsonian Institute's National Portrait Gallery. Thank you very much to both Gwendolyn and to Jason for being with us today. And now please join me in welcoming them to the stage.
Hi, everyone. Welcome. Welcome.
G'day.
So, Jason, I understand you've been up to a lot.
Well, firstly, thank you, Perry World House, University of Pennsylvania, Michael and the team for having me here. I have literally just bounced out of 3 African assignments and underwater work in Palau with Super Typhoon Regasa. That was interesting. And now I've had a haircut and a clean shirt and I'm here with you. So thank you for coming along.
Did you want to start with a video?
Yes, what I thought we might begin with is a little bit of a video that's a random snapshot of a year on the road for me, and there's a little bit of music and things like that. And Spencer, if you could.
There's more?
So I had this grand idea of photographing lions on the savannah at night. I'd slept in a tree with 22 lions just below me in one of the parks, and that went well. So with an equally, you know, irresponsible friend, I went out, sat in the middle of a pride, and took those shots. And it all went well until you see the frames where the lion's suddenly blurry because the lion sees me. I'm running, the lion's after me. I'm faster than I look over about 100 meters. And so I'm running around the four-wheel drive. The lion's chasing me. I jump in. I looked at my mate and he says, "Oh, you're good." And I looked at my cameraman from National Geographic and I said, "How did that look?" And he said, "I was changing the batteries." That was his first and last assignment for National Geographic.
Oh my gosh. I'm exhausted just looking at that video. I don't know how you get to all that. It's amazing. And how do you get started with this? What initially drew you to this remarkable line of work?
I mean, I was always, like many children, creative. I drew and I painted right through my childhood. I loved the arts. I studied art and sciences all the way through high school. And I started photographing at 8 with my mother's little canister Kodak camera. Do you remember? Some people might remember those. And then on the way to school one day, I literally had an epiphany and I want to make images for the rest of my life. 3 months later, my grandmother went to Hong Kong. I had $250 from delivering newspapers, and she came back with a camera. And I had pictures published off my third roll of film at about 16. So I think it was the universe and a passion for storytelling early for me. Yeah.
And how many years with Geographic now?
This is my 25th anniversary. Yeah. Mm.
And a lot has probably changed during that period and returning to locations. Do you see those differences and how do they impact you?
It's been interesting because one of the things that I've noticed with the transition into digital is that people will modify images into the form that they think that they want people to see. They'll show the Amazon rainforest that's in drought for 7 years and it looks perfectly green at the end of the rainy season. But I know that because I go back repeatedly to some of these places and I see habitat that's no longer there, or I see sometimes habitat that's been reclaimed and it's doing very well. But I think for me, all of my tertiary studies were in the animal sciences and applied science. I was self-taught as a photographer. So coming from that background, it was quite shocking sometimes to see the impact. And as a young adult, you see it quite, there's a visceral feeling about our emotions when we see things not going well. And that drove me on, I think, as to work so diligently at my craft long before I was with National Geographic.
And is there a way that you use your visual, your compositional choices to communicate that change?
When I was drawing and painting, I looked at my compositions quite differently. I was fixated on, bless you, I was fixated on what didn't belong rather than what belonged. And if I look back at my earliest work, even photographically, there's a certain balance to my pictures that I'm proud of. But I also realised that because I was aware of those elements, if I wanted people to feel what I was feeling and to understand what I was feeling, everything has a place and everything should be in that place. It's like portraiture. Where you put the elements in a picture is crucial to the message that someone who is not with you is going to get. Mm.
And with making those choices and over time, I mean, climate change, as you mentioned with the rainforest has, caused so many differences, right? And your own response to them, changes over time. How do you help viewers to connect with those changes when when you're photographing or things that are not necessarily inanimate but non-human?
Yeah, a wonderful question.
Get that empathy.
Yeah, I mean, I think today for anyone who was at the 1.5 lectures, Steve was talking about touching people where they live. And that's a very different thing. It's a difficult thing to do when you're talking about an ecosystem or a landscape that people have never seen and may never visit, but also too when you're talking about non-human species. And some species are quite disturbing to humans, spiders or toads or things like that, snakes in Australia, obviously, we have lots of snakes. But for me, it's never entered my mind that I cannot create a connection with someone who has enough interest to look at my work. I don't let that enter my brain, because if I do, then it would hold me up in the field trying to create that imagery. There'd be that barrier, I think, as to why am I doing this if no one's going to pay attention, or no one's going to feel for this animal or these displaced peoples. That would be a death knell for me, putting myself through what I go through.
And is there concern for the kind of fatigue that people might feel around really challenging images, seeing things over and over again? Sometimes there's that, that urge to look away for something that is, a little easier to digest visually. How do you negotiate that to continue to have, the audience, with you on the journey without feeling exhausted?
I think for me, I think if I could humbly say this, the key to success for me. So I will jump into that. My legs are under that elephant seal, by the way. I can see the screen behind you. And the elephant seal swam up from subantarctic islands, and national parks called me. And I ran into the water. I drove to the coast, ran into the water. I didn't put my wetsuit on. The water was 10 degrees, thinking it would swim away. And I went in and I sat down, and he came and put his head in my lap and went to sleep for 3 hours. And I can guarantee you, if you've seen Happy Feet and how angry those things are, when you've got a 3-ton elephant seal with its head in your groin, you're not moving the elephant seal. That's the bottom line. And eventually it woke up and roared just as the sun went down. And I took that one frame. But back to your question. I think for me, it's all about context. So if I'm shooting something, if you get that one frame that's very difficult, I know I'm hot. Yeah. So you should look. It's pretty good. Yeah. The but it's if you get that one frame that is incredibly difficult, like incredibly difficult to look at, if you give people a context of where that's captured, a sense of place, a sense of responsibility, that yes, that animal has been slaughtered for the bushmeat market or whatever the case might be. But then all of a sudden you give that context by saying, well, here's a family, that's their only source of protein, is to eat that endangered tortoise. And I dare anyone to say that you wouldn't do that for a child of your own. When you have limited resources, which is often the impact on wildlife and ecosystems, you will do what you need to do to survive. It's very easy for us in our countries, but I try and give that context so that people go, well, okay, it makes me uncomfortable, but I understand sometimes why that is happening.
The picture with the tiger, though, now I have to go back to it.
Yeah.
That's, this is young Jason, right? So this relationship with animals and with the natural world is something that comes from childhood as well.
It is, yeah. My father was one of these famous long haul truck drivers in Australia that you see the shows now in the US. And he was always finding injured wildlife, snakes and owls and reptiles and tortoises. And he would bring them home with him. And our home was only the second house in that wetland area. So there was always snakes in the house and things like that. So I lived somewhat of a Gerald Durrell existence growing up, and then straight out of high school I was offered a position as a zookeeper at Melbourne Zoo. That was me then. And my tertiary studies, which were in applied science and animal sciences, not in photography, was done during that 12 years at the zoo, which is also when I formed a stock agency to disseminate the images I was creating, to spread the word, especially in educational publishing. So that 12 years was, my childhood was not absent of any species at all. It was just all I knew. Then I went into a career of managing wildlife conservation, followed by traveling the world. But seeing animals in the wild for the first time when I had to come back to captivity was quite confronting sometimes, because we did it well, but you can tell when an animal is in captivity when it's not.
Yeah. I mean, there's a real difference there, you know, in thinking about what the needs of the animals are versus the educational aspects of people having access and opportunities to learn and be educated
Yes, yeah.
about those animals.
And we actually at Melbourne Zoo's the second oldest zoo in the world to London Zoo. And we actually prepared, I worked carnivores for many years. So my specialty was large carnivores and primates, gorillas and orangutans and things like that. But we actually had a food preparation area which involved live animal preparation. So we had the best diet in the world. We would prepare live animals for feeding to our carnivores every day of the week. So that gave them fur and bones and all of those things they would get in the wild, which is not possible to do in the US in zoos. But you had to be able to do that. Everyone wants to cuddle a tiger cub, but if you actually can't go and take the life of another animal in order to give that animal the best existence it can, that department wasn't necessarily for you at that time. Yeah. It was tough. A lot of juxtaposition in those 12 years, a lot of juxtaposition.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And then the move into photography.
Well, so I was shooting through that whole time, and it was a learning curve. This is a red kangaroo joey inside the pouch, attached to the teat. It's the only photo ever taken of a red kangaroo joey attached, and the mother came back to a cattle station in the desert where I was working, and the researcher from Germany, Simon and Robert, was there, and that kangaroo had been released 7 years before, after its mother had been killed by a car. And so that kangaroo came out of the desert, like out of the desert. And the researcher went, "Oh my God, that's the kangaroo I raised." So for 12 days, we got closer and closer and closer to the point where she could stroke it. And on the last day of that shoot, I put a special lens inside the pouch. She reached around and opened the pouch, and I put the lens in, and I guesstimated based on my biological knowledge how far the joey was from the opening, pre-focused the lens, took that shot. And yeah, and then the kangaroo went back to the desert. The researcher went back to Cologne, and I drove 5,000 kilometres back to Melbourne. So yeah.
So special technology, like this lens that you're able to get into the kangaroo's pouch, are there other innovations or, you know, challenges that you have seen come and go over the last 24 years? You know, and here I'm thinking about, you know, drone photography. I had a student once who was like, "I'm an aerial photographer," and I'm like, "Well, actually, it's your drone, you know, that's doing that photography." But you know, how do you think about these innovations? Are they helpful? You know, you mentioned the ways that people, you know, adjust their photographs. Like, what is the role of AI? Are these developments things that you welcome, that you test out? How do you negotiate those changes?
I mean, for me, I've been around long enough. I started on negative film and Kodachrome 64, the old slide film, remember? Wonderful, best film ever made. And so I learnt my craft in the furnace of that unforgiving medium. And digital, I think, the problem with digital, it's wonderful, it brought everyone into the world of storytellers, but it's so forgiving that people have lost the knowledge to understand why things happen in pictures. And for me, I've never really allowed myself to be caught up in those innovations because I still shoot on fully manual. My cameras are the best that they can buy. Everything's fully manual for me. All of this is fully manual. None of it's cropped. I don't crop my pictures. And the post-production for any photographers watching or here in the room is 17 seconds a frame. I don't know how to do a layer or a dodging and burning, all the things you're talking about. I don't have that skill. And I have no interest. I just love capturing frames. So I created this bubble creatively for myself where I actually just went out and tried to create wonderful compositions that were in the camera, as if I could never do anything to them after the fact. Drone photography is amazing, and I can see images through it, but I seem to be a magnet for wind. So I bought a drone, and every time I bought it, it's whoosh, you know, that's what's gone. So I'm not good for drones. But the AI is fascinating. I saw Tom's in the room here. Tom's the expert if anyone needs to know about AI. He's the master, I've been told, at University of Pennsylvania. And but AI is fascinating because it's impacting roles, it's impacting creativity in all the arts, in all documentaries. But again, I'm paid, thankfully, I am paid to be in the field and be in person, whether I'm shooting or whether I'm hosting television or whatever the case might be. Again, I'm so hardwired to getting it right at the time, and my brain just reads all the scenes in 1/8 of a stop in light. You know, that's I know some people are terrified of it, but for me, it hasn't. I'm still being, and at the moment, I'm still got work scheduled for several years to come. I, People want me in the field creating real moments, not manufactured moments. I think there's concern in some areas of photography, but touch wood for me so far that hasn't impacted me, and I find it fascinating. But I'd rather be covered in mud than sitting in front of a computer. I think so. Yeah.
Yeah. So when you are deep in the mud,
Mm,
what are the ethical concerns? Like when you're in a vulnerable ecosystem or you're around endangered species, wildlife, how do you, navigate going into those environments, going into those habitats or indigenous communities, for
mm.
example?
For me, decades of natural history study and field work gives me a solid foundation that probably most people don't have. So when I'm working with endangered species, my knowledge base is knowledge is everything, science is everything. So my knowledge is greater than the average person's. I rely on scientists, researchers, other field experts if it's a site that I'm not familiar with or that I need that access to get. But I have a mantra, and the mantra is hard and fast. Is the animal doing what it was doing before I arrived? Is it sleeping? Is it eating? Is it mating? Is it digging a burrow? Is it running away? And every human interaction impacts something in the universe. The laws of physics says it does. But I try and minimize that so that if the animal suddenly says, oh my God, Jason's there, it settles down, if at all possible. Some species are very, very timid, and then it goes on with what it's doing, which is what I'm meant to document. But then again, some species are so hard to get. There was a shot of a critically endangered wombat, that little animal coming out of that burrow. I sat in a tree for 5.5 weeks, 20 hours a day to shoot one frame of that animal. And I was covered in swarm ticks. And if you scratch those ticks, it was like getting the mange, but you couldn't move because they're so timid that you just sat there wanting to peel your skin off for 5.5 weeks. But we ended up raising enough awareness, and I got a couple of frames to raise enough money to fund the research for 5 years. The ticks lasted 9 months. So my wife was given a pair of tick tweezers by her mother-in-law, but she never got the ticks. But you know, the thing is that ethical side of it, there's no other way to get that story. In Indigenous people, it's some photographers that photograph Indigenous people. This is the goal and this is the outcome. I'm not like that. I'm too much of an empath. But I've worked with displaced people. I've done stories on HIV in children in Uganda, many difficult subjects. And I think you need to think about the person first. If you can't have empathy for your own species, you're not going to have empathy for ecosystems and non-human species. So,
Do you change your appearance or your do you cover yourself with mud, in order to blend into the environment? Do you have to take on some kind of camouflage or
yeah.
how do you
It depends
approach
on
those?
the subject. I've used hides. Sometimes I just sit there and you become part of the
Mhm.
landscape. I've set hides up. I've used camouflage, but also too, I've never not known an existence without being around animals. So I have this strange simpatico, I guess, that when I'm there, things seem to calm down quite well.
Mhm.
But again, often we might have more time than the other average person walking past, but I also might have 5 minutes and I've made it look like 5 days because a lot has happened in that 5 minutes. So I think I assess the situation as best as I can, always putting the photograph, which is no one at Geographic might agree with this, but the photograph is always secondary for me. The experience, and I've learnt over time to sit and watch. This comes with age, maybe, but sometimes I'll take a picture, but it's so beyond imagining what I'm seeing, so beautiful or so heartbreaking that sometimes I'll sit and watch, and see what evolves, and eventually something might come, or maybe it doesn't. Maybe it doesn't.
Mhm. And with those local or indigenous communities, how do you collaborate with them or engage with them? What sorts of approaches do you take to build the relationships that are necessary to do respectful work?
Mm.
And do you then like later? I know some folks like share their work back with those communities. How do you maintain relationships? Is that an important thing? Returning to communities?
Sometimes I do have the opportunity to return, but sometimes the engagements or the encounters are just random. You're coming through a forest or up a lake, excuse me, or down a river, and all of a sudden there are people there, and that whole interaction is in those moments, and I don't speak the language, I don't know the culture. I assess whether they're welcome, that they're open to an engagement. The easiest thing that has been lost, I think, in humanity, especially in the current climate, it's just a smile. I smile. Literally, that's my entree. Never let the camera be your opening credit. You know, I smile, an open palm. It's a universal gesture for thousands of years. I'm not an enemy. I'm not armed. And then if I feel like a photograph is possible, or if I can communicate, if they understand what a camera is, and they say no, that's fine. But I don't leave. I don't end the engagement just because I can't photograph them. No matter how short on time I am, I will burn all my time to spend time with those people simply because they've welcomed me into that moment of their life. And I have no idea what that will mean for them moving forward. Whereas there's other times where people want you to take a photo because something terrible's happened, and they want that story told, and they say, please, you know, they can gesture, or I'll have a translator, sometimes multiple translators to get to the language that I need to get. But I mean, for me, some photographers have the ability to be invisible photographing the human condition. I can do that, but similarly for me, there's been so many heartbreaking and uplifting moments photographing the human condition that, I mean, people have tried to kill me. I've been shot at multiple times. I've been stoned in villages. Things have gone sideways so many times, you know, so many times. And you go, okay, I won't take your picture. You don't say that because you're running. And just as a key to success, if someone's shooting at you with an automatic weapon, you don't go left, right, left, right. That's pretty predictable. You go left, left, right, right. You just got to mix it up, you know. And don't drop the camera because it might have good pictures on the memory card. But you know, it's one of those things that I worked with a crew once on that HIV Uganda shoot, and their advisors were having them sit back 30 metres from children with HIV and typhoid and tuberculosis, sorry. And that's just not me. I was just in the dirt, in the huts, working with the families and the children and things like that. And I remember the cameraman at the time saying to me after we finished the shoot that he'd never forgive himself for having isolated himself safely from that. But you know, I don't care. It's about the person and the interaction. Respect is everything, I think, if you can achieve it. Yeah.
Yeah, and you're working with the whole crew
In that case,
in these teams.
yeah, I was, yeah.
Uh-huh.
They brought in a crew, and then the NGO brought me in to document that story, and they were ill prepared. They shouldn't have been there. They'd never worked in that part. They'd never worked in Africa, and that's fine. Everyone's got to go there for the first time, but they were not prepared. Yeah.
Mhm, mhm.
Mm.
When you started, did you start as a member of a team like that? Like, did you
Mm.
train up with somebody or?
No, I started by disappearing for months at a time
Yeah,
by myself.
yeah.
So all the money I would earn from the zoo, I would buy cheap lenses and air tickets, and I would just disappear for months into countries and bump out 8 countries later. I did tell my mate at the time, we're not getting across the Magatagati Pans before that four-wheel drive that was just up there
Oh.
got stuck, and we didn't. That's a big snake, by the way. That was a decent-sized snake. These frames are just some fieldwork frames. I apologise in advance. There's a couple that'll probably leave you with nightmares. Sometimes I sleep under the four-wheel drive. Sometimes cats love four-wheel drives for shade and for hunting. I spent many years working alone. Many, and I think about 3 weeks in, I start laughing at my own jokes. I like to say 3 weeks, but it's probably about 3 days, and that's when I know, wow, I'm really alone because I'm by the campfire at night, laughing by myself. You know, so and so.
Do you see parallels between these human stories and the stories about animals or ecosystems in your work? How are they lining up?
Looking at this.
Yeah.
Yeah. Michael's sitting there going, Jace, I should have told him not to put those pictures in. Um,
More ick.
yeah, there's a couple of ick frames. While these are up, I'll get the ick out of the way. So if you can imagine a disease, I've had it. That's the easiest way. I've had 2 fingers cut off, discs punched out of my neck, this shoulder reattached, 5 surgeries on that, larva living behind eyeballs. That was not that. That was easy going. I've I've had more parasite infections. I larva living in ear canals, and I tore my abdominal wall open and stayed in the field for 18 months with pills and whiskey, while a giant bag of blood on my side. Got some good work in that 18 months though. That's in the top end of Australia where there are real crocs in that waterhole. And that's pangolin, the world's most traded animal. But so it's hard. It's hard on the body. But the parallels, yes, by all means. I think the thing is that as you get older and you see the interconnectedness of the stories, whether people are in a city or whether they're living in a village or they're on an island that's disappearing in the Pacific, you see the interconnected elements if you're paying enough attention. And so I don't see the difference between the subjects now when I document. It's all equally crucial to me now.
Yeah. What do you feel is the most urgent um, subject that you need to turn to next? Like, is there something on the horizon that you feel really needs documenting, particularly around climate change,
Mm,
the impact on ecosystems, on communities?
mm,
Like, what is this moment's kind of next
mm.
challenge?
I mean, I think if I can give 2 answers to that question, one would be that I think in the climate space, no one realizes that some cities and some communities are doing it so well. The greening of cities and the heat island effect where most of our populations live. You know, there are communities out there that are doing great work. That doesn't get shared. That people don't realize. People live without hope in urban environments as if there's not a lot they can do. But I'm an ambassador for both Tourism Australia and Sustainability Victoria. And part of my role is to say we can do something, but it's also difficult to convince people these things are achievable. We've talked about this because it seems so monumental, but I don't think it is. I'm a glasses 3/4 kind of full kind of person. So if I'm looking at city urban environments, it's like, let's show people as a documentarian, let's show people how communities with nothing are able to achieve outcomes that people with unlimited resources, metaphorically speaking, don't achieve. In the wild, I would say that um, there are so many issues, but again, the Pacific is sinking. We know these things, but I think again, if you look at a map of Earth and you look at population densities, we are crammed into the smallest amounts of Earth, and there are vast regions that we don't inhabit that we influence through our activities, whether they're grasslands or polar caps or oceans we don't get to the bottom of because they're so deep. So I think for me, I don't, I've never had a bucket list. I'm not avoiding the question, Gwendolyn, but I think if someone thinks that the story is worthy of attention and comes to me and says, let's do this or let's do this or whatever, I always find that there's a reason to do it. I think because the butterfly effect is if I just document, like I did, I was just underwater in Palau and the reefs are amazing and everything like that. But there's a super typhoon destroying southern China and the Philippines, and that typhoon was not meant to exist. You know, it was meant to be sunny skies and things like that. So here I am losing all my light to a man-made, theoretically, you know, nature-induced event that's happening. So how do I document that? Do I speak with local people and say, what's this done to your week of fishing? Because of course, you know, they can't fish and things like that. So I mean, it's convoluted and I apologize, but for me, I think all of the issues are important. And I think awareness is just what we need to achieve, and that every little bit that we can do makes a difference. And that's where people don't realize. If you turn off the light, it makes a difference, not just to your electricity bill. It makes a difference somewhere. If you turn off the tap, if you don't use plastic, if you push your local government to recycle better, all of those things that we can do, that actually has an impact on the world. And I know in Australia, on some of our most remote islands, National Geographic did a story on plastic and the mapping of where plastic drifts. And the plastic comes from parts of Asia and the United States and winds up from the United States on our east coast, such as the global trade in plastic through the Earth's oceans. I'm not bashing America. Our plastic goes somewhere as well. But it's like, what do? You go to the beach, you pick up the plastic so a turtle doesn't chew on it. It's anything you can do is good. But as a documentarian, I'll work as hard as I can on any story I'm given. Yeah.
Yeah. I have one last question before we turn it over to the audience so you can think about if you have questions. And it builds on this, but maybe you've already kind of said part of it. It's about hope, right? These cities who are doing it well, everyone who picks up a little bit of garbage. I remember seeing these pictures of the old presidential candidate, Michael Dukakis, who would pick up garbage on his way to work every day, right? He had a bag with him every day. Like, what are the things that are happening now that really give you hope for the future, for a change in the negative impact that has occurred?
It sounds like a cliche to say this sitting in a university, but education is so important now. And my son and everyone's children and things like that, they're getting knowledge that we never had, and they're not. And I went to Andrea's book launch, and part of that premise was, how did children? Do you want to go back one there, Spencer? Yeah. How do the children see the future? Is it utopian? Is it dystopian? And children always, they're a blank slate. They have that's all right, just leave it. Yeah. They have hope. And for me, I am genuinely a hopeful person about what we're doing. There are people giving their lives, people at this institution who have dedicated their careers to making change, whether it be through science and education. So wherever I go, I see people in the remotest communities getting on with their lives. Rwanda is an amazing example post the genocide. There is not a skerrick of rubbish in Rwanda. Like, I dare you to go to Rwanda and see this. Every village is spotless. They don't have sectarian violence. They don't have everything. Every month they have a cleanup day. It is incredible what they've achieved, and with no resources, literally with no resources. So for me, I travel the world. I'm privileged. It is a gift. My job is a gift. I work hard at it, but it's a privilege and a gift. And I see these incredible places, many of them very beautiful, which fills me full of hope. And then I go to a bushmeat market, and I see this abject devastation where there's endangered species coming in. They get sold to people who want them for the pet trade in North America and Asia. And then the next day there's more animals there, and I go back to my room and I cry and I have a drink. And I get up the next morning and I go back and I document it again and again and again. But I know that is not the sum of what's happening in Amazonia, because there are people out there fighting for that survival. And I think you have to lift yourself up. I'm a white guy living in a developed country. I have a roof over my head. I have food in my fridge. I understand all the cliches. But what I can guarantee you that I see in the world is that there are people just in everyday life doing their damnedest. No one's out there, it's a misnomer. No one's out there trying to destroy the planet. I don't think really anyone tried to destroy it for the last 70 years. That's just hyperbole. Some people wanted to make money, of course, but no one wants to kill their home. But now we've got the knowledge. How do we act on it? What do we do as people? Do we smile? We smile, we wave, we communicate, we learn about other cultures, we learn about the issues that they have. When we travel, we try and invest in a trickle-down economy. I do lots of travel. You try and find out where your money's going. Is it just going back to some foreign national and the people are paid $15 a day. A terrible story, if I might. Just in Africa, a vehicle crashed about 15 minutes before I got there. And middle of nowhere, like absolutely the middle of nowhere. We turned up, my friend and I, and extracted, there was an elderly couple in there, the guests, we extracted them. I'm an ex-lifeguard. I stabilized her, but I could not save her. So she passed, the lady passed, then I helped get her removed. You know the story. But the thing is that those people were there. It wasn't the driver's fault, but that driver was on 15 US a day, given an itinerary that he could not achieve without speeding on very bad roads. That vehicle broke. The tie rod arm broke. The vehicle crashed, not his fault. But $15 a day when those people were paying $1,000 a day. So when you're traveling, and I don't want to finish on that story, but when you're traveling, really pay attention to who you're going with. Dig a little bit. Find out where your money's going. Tip the people the Indigenous people, if you're working with people that help you, tip them well. Learn about their families. To your earlier point, Gwendolyn, I don't show people the pictures that I shoot of them unless they ask. And 9 times out of 10, they never ask. And that's not because I'm being exclusive. It's just that no one likes how they're shot in a photo, or very rarely. So I don't want to break the fifth wall, the theatre fifth wall. Also, too, I'm there to work. I'll engage once and, have a good time and things like that. Sometimes I'll send pictures if they think that they want the pictures, but I don't even do this on a phone, because that phone in most of the places that I work is 2 years, 3 years salary. So anything that I can do that creates a barrier between me and my subject, I extract from the equation. And for me, if I take anything, I take photos, 6x4 prints, and they're in my field journal. And family is the constant. You want to work with people, you want to learn from people, you want to become immersed in a community. Take some photos from home. Your dog, your cat, your mum, your dad, your brother, your sister, your partner. This is my family. Instantly you are in. You are in the community, and for the right reasons, because family is the human constant.
Thank you. Questions from the audience? Is one right here? There's a microphone, yeah.
Okay. Thank you so much. Beautiful presentation today. I'm so curious about the physical demands of your job, and I don't mean the illness or the injury, but it looks like you scuba, you must hike tens of miles a day, climb glaciers. I want to hear about all of that cool adventuring that you get to do.
It is very physically demanding. My standard day, let me convert it into pound for you. My standard day pack would be probably about 80 pound, I guess. I used to be 6'4". I'll retire at 4'6". But it's one of those things that if I can, I will give. If there's someone to assist me, I will, and there's the money, I'll bring children from a village or something to carry things even that I can carry myself, because it puts money into the local community. But what I do is that when I'm home, I put on the weight sometimes when I'm away, because there's a lot of food when I travel, especially here in the US. But at home, I train 7 days a week. So I'm in the pools at least 5 times a week. I'm on the bike every day. I don't do weights to get big, because I don't want to be that big. I just do exercises that help me carry backpacks and big lenses and things like that. So for me, it's a 365 day a year job. Otherwise, you couldn't do it. You couldn't stay on the road unless you put in the time when you get home. Yeah.
Up in the front.
Thank you for sharing these extraordinary photographs and your experience with them. You mentioned cities, and I'm wondering whether you've done any urban photography.
It's a great question. And when I mentioned cities, I thought someone's going to ask me about that. The short answer is I have, but not in our developed countries. So if I've been in Latin America or through Africa or Asia or something, the desire to take those kinds of photographs, for some strange reason, seems more interesting to me in those spaces than it does in my own environment. So I never really do it when. Yeah, in those countries, yes, I do sometimes. And it's funny, because I find urban architecture in particular quite fascinating, and I could easily. I do go out and just start looking for interesting compositions, and I shoot it in my time off. I mean, this is I just shot 30,000 frames in Africa and whatever in Palau and whatever in the other shoots I've had this year. But I love photography. I love looking at photography. So if I've got an afternoon off, or even if it's my phone or something, I'll find myself creating just to feed the whirlwind that is my brain. Yeah. But cities are fascinating. Yeah.
Great. And in the back there? A little bit further back in the black jacket.
Hello, thank you for the great presentation. This was very, I'm glad that I came. I'm a photographer myself. My grandfather was a chief conservator. It meant a lot. I have two very quick questions. The first one is, how has your documentarian work influenced policy? And, is there a specific moment where, like, the images that you've created and like the videography, the photography has influenced actual policy change and things have changed? And second, as a photographer, what do you do with like all of the extra images? Like there's so many.
There's so many. Thank you. So first question first. Yes, on numerous occasions where I've shot critically endangered species, and government has then protected areas or put funding behind protecting certain species. I used to go into a desert area of Australia that didn't even have a park status, and the work that I did there encouraged the government to make it a national park, not even a reserve. But I think probably for one of the geographic societies that I work for, I think I did 5 critically endangered species, and policy was changed for I think all of them, and all of them became the largest fundraisers for those species, for that society. And so that butterfly effect, and then there's other individual frames. That's the stories. But the frame wasn't in here, but there was a frame that we won, that Geographic, we won some awards with, where an elephant had been poached, and it looked like a terrible frame, and it was. However, the backstory was that they'd expanded national park borders, and they evicted Indigenous people who went into an arid area and then were starving to death. So they came and they killed the elephant for food, got chased off. So they weren't there for ivory or anything, but the government was covering up the fact that a whole community was now starving. So I think we titled that sequence of images the poacher, the virus, because it had my brain will catch up with the disease. I've had so many, but anyway, let me come back to it. But the poacher, the virus, and the bushmeat market, that we gave it a title, and that made the government in that particular country quite uncomfortable, because I had the same situation with mountain gorillas. I came across displaced Batwa people, one of the small races of people that had lived in Central African forest for thousands of years and had never hunted a mountain gorilla, still do not hunt a mountain gorilla, but they expanded park boundaries, which we all want, except they evicted the people, and the people were rotting with alcohol and drug addiction in a banana plantation across a border with people who felt they were subhuman. And I heard about this, I found my way there, I got myself into that site, I documented that, and then that'll come out in a future story in one of my books. But that was heartbreaking, because these people had been literally living traditionally for thousands of years, but our currency is crucial to mountain gorilla survival, so it's complex. So, oh, and all the extra pictures. I have 100 terabytes, yeah, stuff, yeah.
That is really challenging, that balance, right, between expanding these these spaces of preserve, these parks, and also ensuring that the people who have lived on them have lives and livelihoods, and it's
and in Australia, we have found in certain parts of Australia with our Indigenous people, the First Nations people, 60,000 years of continuous civilization, the oldest on earth. In some areas, we've had enormous success with them bringing their culture to tourism and national park management, and being rangers, and that knowledge is valuable. And then in other areas, we haven't, because for 60,000 years they've been a nomadic people, and so suddenly they might have a role, and then they don't turn up for work for a week because they call it walkabout. they've gone off to see another community or something like that, you know. So, and how do you change that? That's their culture. So that balance, even in my own country, has been difficult. Yeah. Mm.
Oh, there's a question in the white shirt up here.
First of all, thank you for sharing all those pictures. And I think your life's work is really impressive. And I guess somewhere in those years, like you hide in trees, like above 20 lines you mentioned, you might come along like poachers or wildlife hunters that don't see you and you're there with a camera. Have you ever like actually documented poaching and helped like find those individuals?
Yeah, it's a great question. So the question, if it didn't come through, was have I engaged with poachers? Yes, I have seen poachers when I've been in hides and things like that, and they don't necessarily know I'm there, or sometimes they do, because remember, they're amazingly gifted at finding the animals because inherently they're probably from the same community. And here's the crucial thing, and that's a really important question, is that I'm not there to make the news, I'm there to document the news. And in my career, I have worked with the most gifted, giving people that you can imagine who, you know, wouldn't hurt a fly through to people who would, by any definition, are evil, you know, by what we would understand as evil. But I will engage with all of humanity because that's my role. I literally do not suddenly say, I'm not talking to you because you've got the head of a lion on a spike. No. I want to know their story, providing they're not shooting at me, which sometimes they do. But, you know, I will engage with those people. I want that story, and then sometimes try and photograph it. Sometimes they don't let me. But it's important for me in my life experience, my life journey, to not have any boundaries in the type of work that I do. Without naming countries, I have worked with, you know, I know too many people, but I know people in the military in some countries, and one particular team would use the helicopters for target practice. They'd do their target practice on poachers, you know, so they would take the helicopters to go hunting poachers. That's serious, but they valued their wildlife, they valued their country, and they had no grey area. So I went with them, you know, I went with them to tell their story. Yeah.
Wow. Why don't you come front and then to the.
Thank you very much. You come from a country that, or where we have lived in an area where some people like you have the freedom to play the role that you just said. Do you have any thoughts about, or have you ever felt constrained about what you feel allowed or not permitted to be witness to?
No, if I've ever felt slightly constrained about my own boundaries, my brain literally plucks me out of that spot and says, you know, I don't like regret or what if. I've never liked those emotions. So if I can put myself not deliberately in harm's way or do whatever, find the money to get on a plane, go somewhere, meet people, document something, I've never ever felt a constraint. And I think that was part of my upbringing in a positive way. And my upbringing was not stable. So for me, I felt released to be anything I wanted to be, not necessarily through neglect, but maybe. And so for me, that's freeing. It's very freeing to say that I'm going to take off and try and make a career out of something most people struggle with. Yeah.
And here with the pink scarf.
Hi, I'd like to query you a little bit about your aesthetics. So, am I right in assuming you consider yourself a photojournalist as opposed to a fine artist photographer, like let's say Edward Bertinsky? And what do you perceive the differences to be? Because certainly your work fulfills my expectation of what a fine art photographer is.
Yeah, thank you. I think I straddle the fence some of the, and of course, you know, in this environment, I could sit here and run terrible image after terrible image, but we don't. We all know, we're educated, we know there wasn't a need to do that. So the documentary work that I do, I would say I'm a documentary photographer. I'm not reportage, so I don't do news photography, if people understand the difference. I've been in war zones or conflict has erupted around me, but I don't go hunting that. I've never ever had an issue with feeling it's okay to take beautiful imagery, that whether someone would want to hang it on a wall or not, simply because it's beautiful does not mean it should not be documented. I met Ed Butinsky many years ago, excuse me, at National Geographic. He wouldn't remember, we had some drinks together, but his work is interesting because it's showing the social human condition that has also turned into fine art of biblical proportions, you know. So he's also, I think, straddled that line of art versus documentary, and not reportage. So I think for me, when I go into a story, I have a core idea, and then I try and build spokes off of that core idea. And if they become beautiful and they become artistic, that's great. If they become brutal and soul destroying, that's okay as well. Yeah.
I'm wondering if there's a question from the Zoom audience? No?
Mm.
Okay. Another one from here in the blue and black sweater?
Oh, sorry. Thank you for the work that you're doing, and definitely the presentation you just gave us. With respect to areas that you've returned to, I was wondering if any particular example comes to mind of a really dramatic change in an ecosystem or with respect to species that you were observing. Um,
Yeah, very much so. There's numerous, of course. Yeah, very much so. I mean, it almost sounds, and it's funny, I hate that I'm about to use this phrase because Simon and I have spent some time together talking about this. It almost sounds like a cliche to say Greenland, because we've been doing it. We watched a wonderful documentary last night, but I have an ongoing project documenting the coast of Greenland. And the last time I went back, the staggering changes from the previous time, which hadn't been that long, like a couple of years, were so profound. But then to the other question, my mind was thinking, wow, this is brutal and heartbreaking and also simultaneously staggeringly beautiful. So I've seen that. I forget the year now, but there was a thermal bubble above Greenland and it lost 25% of its ice mass. So I have one photo. I think it was in here. Was there a photo with the glacial fracture zone and a bright orange mountain sticking out the top? Well, 2 years before that, that mountain was beneath the ice. You couldn't see that mountain. And so you see that sort of thing, but also small changes like the Great Migration's a pet project of mine for 30 years. The short rains don't necessarily appear now. And then they might come into the long rains, or they don't come at all, or the long rains are delayed. Now, wildebeest mothers can hold their calves for 3 weeks post full development. So they get to the southern plains where the short grass plains are, and they can hold those calves for 3 weeks waiting for the rains to come. But what happens when you have 1.6 million wildebeest and the rains don't come? Now, has this happened in the past? Yeah, for sure, that's life. But as we know, climate change is about velocity. Have these effects happened? Have there been ocean recession, desertification, forests coming and going for millions of years? Of course, that should not be part of the debate. It should be about, in my humble opinion, it should be about the velocity. Why in the last 200 years have we implemented changes that now affect major ecosystems around the world? You know, that's how I try and tell that story. Let's just agree on everything. But what is happening now and how quickly has it happened? And where do we go next? And I see that all the time. But some areas I've seen where people have come in and protected sites that were demolished by tourism. And now they're wonderful. They're exotically beautiful because we woke up and said, well, how do we manage numbers? How do we manage people moving around? How do we manage animal movement so they're protected? That happens as well. It's not all doom and gloom. Yeah.
And in the green up here? Okay, that's fine. Go ahead. And then in the green.
Thank you for the amazing speech. And I actually have a slightly cliche question for you. So for a lot of young audience, we're actually thinking about going to the documentary film industry. And I'd love some suggestions or advice from you if possible. Thank you.
For sure. Yes, do it if it's your passion. become thick-skinned very quickly, because it'll happen to you either way. Because we all have wins, we all have losses. The key to success in any documentary making is to be passionate about the subject. So we had a model back in the day at Geographic. If you can photograph your own suburb for 5 years and submit the pictures to show that story so that we could see that you were ready to tell a story for Geographic, that's the commitment that you needed to have. Now, people don't see that anymore. It's much more instantaneous. But tell stories close to home. Tell stories that you can repeat visit. Because it's fine if you turn around and you want to say, Jace, I want to go to Uzbekistan, or so, you say to National Geographic or to a film company, I want to do Uzbekistan. They've probably got someone who's been working there for 30 years and has already done their time. That doesn't mean you shouldn't do it. Put your own spin on it. But also don't get disheartened that you didn't get that commission or that they didn't pick up your work. Sometimes it happens. Sometimes you get it first cab out of the rank. But normally that's not the case. So pick a subject you're passionate about, that you think you can build on and that you can get to repeatedly. Photographers and cinematographers and documentary makers make that mistake. It's the first mistake they make. Have a wagon wheel. This is my model, literally my model. It's a Western wagon wheel. I have the hub at the center of the wagon wheel, and then I come with spokes. I build spokes into that wheel. Is it climate change? Is it poaching? Is it unemployment? Is it deforestation? Whatever, I'm doing environmental things. And as the story expands, my wheel becomes a wheel. And then I build and I start shooting every one of those spokes. And then you have a story. You know, that's my strongest advice to you. Build a wagon wheel. Yeah.
And maybe the last question here in the green.
Hi, thank you for your very inspiring work. I just had a question related to sort of intervention and being a wildlife photographer. Are there instances in which you would intervene? Is there a line that is crossed where you would intervene? Because I know typically you shouldn't, but have you done that in the past?
No, God, no, but great question. You saw my face. Whoa. No, but I've seen it happen. And but I've never intervened. And even if it was, I've never been in a situation where a critically endangered, like one of the birds that I photographed in the Himalaya, there was 26 left. The catch-22 is that the critically endangered eagle feeds only on the chicks of the critically endangered heron that I was photographing. I wasn't in that situation where I had to shoo off an eagle, of course, but I know of people who have intervened, and I don't think it's appropriate. The strongest, most visceral survival I've ever seen was in an Adelie penguin colony on an island in the Ross Sea. And I was there, and the skuas, the polar skuas, they tag team and they eat the chicks alive. And it was late in the season, so they weren't even eating all of the chicks, they were just taking the livers. They attacked this one chick, and this one chick fought and fought and fought like 10 minutes, 15 minutes, kept getting up, and it was soul destroying. And it just kept getting up, and then it crawled. The chick ran to my assistant, who was sitting there, and ran underneath her chest. And she looked up, and she was sobbing. I was emotional and everything, and she just looked at me, and I said, "Stand up." And she said, "I can't." And I said, "Stand up or go home." And there was, whatever the tone in my voice was hard, but it was like, you have to stand up. So we stood up and we moved away. And of course the chick died. But I'm not there to influence the environment. And but it is hard sometimes. If you brought people into that equation and you said, okay, there's a poacher about to shoot something and I could intervene, yeah, that's a different story. Human on human's a different story. Yeah.
I was going to ask for something hopeful at the end, but I think that is kind of hopeful.
Well, sure. Have we got time for a fun video, Mike?
Yes, a fun video, please.
Yes. Okay, so folks, wonderful. I'm happy to hang around and answer any further questions if you'd like. I want to finish off with this little story here. The gentleman in the photo, Anthony, and I, we went through one of our college degrees together. I helped him take control. Sounds negative, but it's not. He found a wildlife park in the Amazon where the keepers were trading animals with poachers. He didn't have any zoo experience. I'd been at the zoo for 12 years. I helped him gain control. We formed a non-profit at the time, and we would smuggle into the animal trade. We would never buy anything, but we would get ourselves into these situations so we could see where animals are moving, things like that. Short version is the skull, the skin of the male jaguar there was 25 US. The skull was 80. And again, local people are not buying these things, but this is the world we live in, and so how do we manifest it? We come up with solutions. So, I've got the remote I was about to ask about. Thanks, Spencer. So basically, one day we had this property in Raina. The government department calls us up and says that a jaguar has escaped and killed a chicken in a village in the Amazon, and they've confiscated the jaguar. Turned out the jaguar had been living on a sofa in a village watching daytime television in Spanish for a couple of years, and it hadn't attacked a chicken, it had attacked a pregnant lady walking past. The value was fine, and I think they probably called that baby Jaguar baby or something. You know, everyone's tough in Latin America, aren't they? You know, it's like, my mother was attacked by a jaguar and here I am. So they bring us the jaguar because the jaguar has to be confiscated, it's illegal, and they brought it to us. I had lots of experience working with carnivores. I did the medical on the jaguar and so on and so forth. It had never been outside. It had all of its claws except for these ones. Anyone who has a cat knows that the dew claw is the one that catches on your thing. That had been extracted probably as a cub because they're the dangerous claws that go in between ribs. I know that because a tiger put one between my rib once. And it had all of its teeth, but the top incisors were a little bit rounded because it had been eating chicken or had them filed down. So the jaguar had never been outside, and it was here in rainforest. We had all this rainforest around the property, and it was a difficult story, but at the same point in time, this is what happens with the pet trade. And this is what happens when people want bracelets made out of jaguar skin when they go on holidays to the Amazon. The mother gets killed, the cubs get sold, and this is one of the cubs. So thank you, folks. I'm going to let this video run, and thank you so much for coming along and sharing time with me.
Thank you, Jason.
This is the jaguar that we photographed a couple of days ago. It was confiscated by in Raina. As you can see, he's still very, very playful and very strong. You could never do this with a jaguar that hadn't been declawed or had its canines removed. That's better. But this animal that spent the last this animal that spent the last 18 months living on a sofa watching television in air-conditioned comfort, it was a little bit different. He's gonna climb up, I think, completely in about 2 seconds. But we got some great. I can tell. We got some. Oh, he's good. We got some great footage the other day, which we hope will show people just how important it is to protect these species in the wild. It's absolutely crucial that these animals remain in the wild and not living on people's sofas, because at the end of the day, there's so many jaguar being removed from the wild that the genetic viability of the species has to be has to be reduced. And it doesn't matter if you have some jaguar left, there won't be enough of a gene pool for the species to continue. Oh, get your paw out of my mouth. Yeah. So yeah, we're
Let me just thank you once again. Let me just thank you once again, Jason, Gwendolyn. Really appreciate this conversation. I hope this was an inspiration for all of you. Again, happy Climate Week to everybody. Many more great things happening, including another talk in this room tomorrow afternoon. We hope to see you back. Thank you, everybody.